Generation 8 gave us a load of new Pokemon with deep and awesomely interesting origins, and today we are going to go over all of them. Just note that some of these origins are way too deep for us to cover every single detail in a video like this one, which is why we have entire videos dedicated to individual Pokemon lines. So if you like this kind of stuff, be sure to check all those out. Now then, this video is so long, so let's get right into it. Just also remember that Pokemon Sword and Shield is based in the Galar region, which is based on Great Britain, and as such, many Pokemon relate back to the British. So then, on to the mod. So, for starters, Grookey and Thwackey have the iconic Ecuadorian squirrel monkey face, colors and the right patterns and such. Then, Rillaboom is clearly a gorilla. Monkeys and apes of all sorts are some of the few animals known to use tools, hence these Pokemon using sticks. These monkeys also live in the rainforest, hence grass type, but what's up with Thwackey's man bun turned mohawk? Well, this line obviously pull inspiration from drummers. Drums are some of the earliest instruments we have, and as such, ancient tribes from all over the world would often attribute magic or spiritual powers to their music, especially drums. Hence, Rillaboom's Pokédex entry mentioning that its drum has the power to control plants. And as we see in the end credits, Rillaboom is the drummer of a rock band of sorts. I mean, the others are Toxtricity and Obstagoon, and being a rock band drummer, well, that would explain Thwackey's mohawk, and Rillaboom's huge bush dreads? Another fairly common rocker hairstyle. Anyway, what makes these guys British? Well, take a gander at this famous TV commercial from the UK. Yep, it's a drumming gorilla, Cadbury. Plus, gorillas are known for beating their chests quickly, which is also what likely inspired this connection. Also, fun fact, a group of gorillas is called a band. And also, Alfred the gorilla, who lived in England's Bristol Zoo, became internationally famous during World War II, and has since become the city's mascot. Scorbunny, Raboot, and Cinderace are all based on rabbits, first of all, which are in the Chinese zodiac, but also the three main tiers of football, aka soccer, the most popular sport in England. You got the kids playing the game who are all clumsy and thus get this stereotypical Japanese bandage location used to show that character trait. You got the teens and young adults who take the sport more seriously, thus having the proper shoes and outfit for the sport, including this headband and snood, which is what many players wear when it's cold. And also, Raboot is angsty. It tries to hide when it's happy. Typical teen trying to take itself too seriously. And then you have the ace, the big professional soccer player. Fancy shoes, fancy outfit, and maybe the hair on its head is referencing a bike racing helmet. I mean, it's got race in the name, and it's really fast. Bike races are also super popular in Europe, so maybe? Sobble's line is a mix of a chameleon, famous for their camouflage, and a basilisk, famous for their ability to run on water. And they have these flaps, like Intelleon. On top of this line references a fairly common growing up trait. Sobble is a really shy and easily frightened and made nervous little kid. It hides by turning invisible in the water, and then it gets older and enters a full-on emo phase. It's angsty, but still shy, obviously. But eventually it comes out of its shell and has grown into a suave, laid-back, confident sniper/spy using a water gun. Growing up shy and reserved helps you be even better at these two jobs. You know how people hide and keep secrets because you did it yourself your whole life growing up. Plus, once you realize that you can more easily manipulate others with all those skills, well, you start getting more confident. Also, what better time to have a spy than now? With the Galar region. The most famous spy in the world, James Bond, is British himself, and is famous for having loads of gadgets like guns hidden in small objects, spy goggles, and hang gliders attached to suits. All just like Intelleon. And also, by the way, Sobble's number in the Pokédex is 007. Squavet and Greedunt are your very typical squirrels. The UK is full of them, the grey squirrel and the red squirrel, the latter of which is actually native to the UK. They carry berries with them constantly, like real squirrels with nuts. They're quite selfish too. And now, I did mention that red squirrels are native to the UK, and yeah, that does make the grey squirrel an invasive species from mainland Europe. And the grey squirrel is actually so much better at gathering food that it's been endangering the red squirrels. Similarly, the Pokédex entries for Squavet mention that they are found all over the region and are always looking for berries, whereas Greedunt's Pokédex entry mentions that it's slow-witted and constantly losing its berries. referencing the real problem. The Rookity line are all corvids, which is a family of bird, which of course include ravens, crows, blue jays, and chickadees. I'm sure you've gathered which birds inspired which. And these three Pokemon are also different tiers of medieval warriors: the Rookie, the Squire, and the fully fledged Knight. Corviknight even has armor. And by the way, ravens were super common on coat of arms. Blipbug, Dottler, and Orbeetle are Pokemon doing a ladybug properly, the whole life cycle. The larva, pupa, and adult ladybug, specifically the Asian ladybug. But on top of this, it is a nerd turned mad scientist. Look, Blipbug has huge glasses and a bow tie and the messed up hair, the nervously inquisitive eyebrows. Yeah, it's your stereotypical nerd. With Dottler, the nerd gets a mustache, goggles, and builds its own little lab. It's like a big radar system. Notably, radar also plays a role in this entire line. Radars have blips, dots, and use the Doppler effect, and nowadays can utilize satellites orbiting the globe. Radars are technology that essentially sense where things are, thus the psychic type being here. Oh yeah, also by the way, radar technology was first described by a Scottish man, James Clerk Maxwell. But we're not done yet, because Orbeetle is a nerd gone crazy. Clearly a mad scientist. I mean, it even looks like a science-based supervillain from pop culture. Now, sick of being bullied for being a nerd, it's become powerful enough through its own inventions, even going as far as to build its own UFO. And I do want to mention this popular Japanese toy from the 1960s, the radar bug. It's a ladybug. It probably played some role in the inspiration. Nickit and Thievul are mischievous red foxes, famous in the UK for stealing food and eating chickens. And look, Nickit uses its tail to sweep away its paw prints, a common tactic people use to avoid being followed or caught in their crimes. And judging by the suave nature, the mustache, and the mask on Thievul, there's a chance that Guy Fawkes was also a source of inspiration as well. I mean, his name is Fox, and pop culture often portrays him, or people inspired by him, to have this sort of attitude. Plus, he was British and, from many perspectives, was most certainly evil. Fitting of the dark type. Morpeko is a guinea pig, which are popular pet rodents across the world. It's not clear why they are named after pigs, but I mean, I guess they're kind of built like them, and they're also known for eating a lot, and they were also originally captured and bred to eat, as in for us to eat them, like how we eat pigs. But anyway, it's a Pikachu clone, which is always rodent plus electricity. Here you go. Wooloo! It's a sheep! The Scottish and Welsh love their sheep. It's a hairstyle, which I guess you could call it, reflects a hairstyle that is stereotypically attributed to Swedish girls. And Swedes also have a little thing for sheep. And keep that in mind, because as you'll see later on, this region also is full of Norse inspiration too. Dubwool, then, is a Jacob's sheep, which is a specifically British breed of sheep. They have the same number and style of horns, and are usually white with black spots. Pokemon took this a step further and placed the spots in a way that make it also look like a soccer ball. Again, because it's the most popular sport. Though, it should also be noted that a lot of early sport balls, like Scottish tennis balls and English cricket balls, were partially made with wool, perhaps making this connection. Gossifleur and Eldegoss are simply Gossypiums, which is this plant, though I have a feeling that the stereotypically girly act of spreading gossip is an inspiration too. I mean, who's better at gossip than elderly women while getting a perm? Plus, I mean, gossip is all about spreading information about folks, and these plants are all about spreading their cotton and pollen and seeds, and I don't know, maybe that's a stretch, but maybe not. Choodle and Dreadnought are alligator snapping turtles, famous for their incredibly devastating bites. They got the strong mouths and the heavy, rough shells. It's even got the weird nose at the very, very tip. Its head and mouth shape may reflect a bear trap, or perhaps a sort of stereotypical monster machine crusher thing. I mean, look at these examples. Wallace and Gromit happens to be British too. And the whole thing may also be a reference to a cleaver, great for chopping big things in one heavy swing, similar to how these turtles bite in one big massive bite, and being a cleaver would also explain the hole here too. And plus, its horn looks like the bow of a ship, and this only gets more obvious after it Gigantamaxes, and that would explain the name. The Dreadnought class of warship, first built by the British Royal Navy, was built to be a super defensive beast of a ship. Yamper is a corgi. The Queen loves her corgis, a breed from Wales. Notably, dog shows and big-time dog breeding started in the UK too, which is perhaps why this dog's breed changes so drastically upon evolution. Bolthund is some sort of hound. It is a bit too generic and cartoony to specify, though. The name would imply a bloodhound, perhaps, or a dashhound, but none of those No. Greyhound, maybe. They are known for their speed, but they also don't really look like this dog. It's just so generic and toony. Anyway, though, the speed and excited attitude are why it's a hound and electric type. Ah yes, the 3 coal Pokemon. Notably, England started the Industrial Revolution, wherein coal was the lifeblood of industry. Everybody had coal to burn. And here we have just a lump of coal, really, on a wheel. It sort of resembles the roly-poly bug, I suppose. Also, this British dessert is called a jam roly-poly. Here's a roly-poly with custard. It's tasty, unlike this Pokemon. And then it evolves into a minecart filled with coal. Coal had to be mined, because, well, it's mainly found underground. And then Colossal is just a big coal kaiju, really, which is a thing in fantasy. Sort of. More modern fantasy. When it Gigantamaxes, though, it becomes a mountain filled with coal, with a coal furnace in its gut. Perhaps its dinosaurish look is inspired by the fact that coal is a fossil fuel, made from life forms that died hundreds of millions of years ago. Granted, they were mostly plants in the case of coal, but you get the idea. The front middle of Colossal's face is also similar to the fronts of trains, though, going back to coal-powered trains and its previous evolutions having wheels, after all. Barracuda and Barrascuda are both barracudas, obviously. They are some really fast fish. Moving as fast as they do, and considering they ram into their prey, they are most clearly inspired by darts and arrows. And the spinning of Barrascuda's back fins give it a propeller motion, like what we see on torpedoes. Though there are also arrows with fletching that makes the arrow spin, which helps it stay straight. But what are barracudas doing in the UK? Well, nothing. You could say that they actually aren't barracudas and they're pikefish instead, but in World War II, the British invented the Fairy Barracuda, a torpedo bomber. They would drop torpedoes, such as the British Spearfish torpedo, into the water, and they would then travel just over 100 knots, which just happens to be the exact number that the Pokedex entries for this Pokemon state. It's just too good! Every new Pokemon in this game is British! Applin, Flapple, Appleton! We just did a video that explained these guys in detail, so of course, more detail there. But initially, they are the classical depiction of a worm in an apple. Bugs love their fruits. But Game Freak did a little play on words here, as a worm, sometimes pronounced Wyrm, is a type of British and Norse dragon, which is what these are. It's a worm in an apple. Perhaps the famous British worm of Linton is another inspiration. I mean, it's an Applin's name. It's a long, green worm that burrows itself in hills. Plus, some worms and lindworms were not only long and green, but also had 2 legs, just like Applin, and Flapple for that matter. Appleton gets an extra pair of legs though, and gets an apple turnover on its back, a sort of British apple pie. Its Pokedex mentions that those things on its back are sweet, which brings us to their Gigantamax forms, where they are basically caramel-dipped apples with a dragon in it. Silicobra and Sandaconda are simple, a cobra and an anaconda that happen to live in sand. There are plenty of desert-dwelling snakes after all, though none of them have a sandbag on their neck. Anacondas are famous for twisting around their prey to choke them out and crush their bones! Which is why Sandaconda is all coiled up like this, though it uses this shape to help it spring forward. And when Gigantamaxed, it's just a snake tornado, making a bit of a sandstorm. Cramorant is also simple. It's a cormorant that crams food in its mouth. These birds are most commonly found in the British Isles, and are famous for just trying to eat fish that seem way too big for them, but that they can actually eat. I mean, look at this! Oh my word! But at least in terms of design, it's not just a blue version of the bird. They added a bib, see? Because it eats a lot. Icecue is a penguin. It's kinda far from home, but it's got an ice cube on its head. Some penguins are known to stray too far and wind up on icebergs, flowing just out to sea. And there you go. But considering just how British the rest of the Pokemon are, why is there just a penguin? Well, while I'm not positive these are any of the main inspirations, from what I've gathered, penguins are quite the cultural phenomenon in the UK ever since they were brought to the first zoos, which, by the way, the London Zoo is one of the first in the modern world. But also, in the UK, there is a penguin hockey team, a penguin candy bar, clothes line, one of the biggest book publishers in the world. Not to mention, most early scientific expeditions into Antarctica were made by the British. And also, in 2011, a penguin was spotted on the British shore. It just washed up. It's so far from home. Notably, Ice-Cube's Pokedex does mention that it drifted in on the flow of ocean waters from a frigid place, so it's not local by any means. Sizzlipede and Centiskorch are mustached centipedes. Centiskorch's makes it look like a mustached samurai helmet, which was actually a thing, and you can really see what I mean in Kabu's logo. And this Japanese connection works out well because there's this gigantic reddish-brown centipede yokai, the Omukade, which clearly inspires the Gigantamax form. The circles on their undersides are burners, like a stovetop, and when attacking, Gigantamax Centiskorch curves up into the shape of a radiator coil, which are used in heaters. And notably, we can't not talk about the fire centipede. Yeah, the fire centipede is the specific centipede these things are based on. I mean, it works perfectly. It's the same colors, it's got the same leg thing, it's flat. Good job. And by the way, while these centipedes are found in Asia and Africa, the stovetop, or oven range as we know it today, was invented by Benjamin Thompson, American-born British physicist, by which I mean he was born in America, but it was still under British control at the time, and this guy also fought in the Revolutionary War, but on the British side. He was a British loyalist, and because of that, he took his invention to London, and the people in London loved it. Therefore, stovetops are British. Or should I say, hob. Yeah, they have their own word for that, too. Clobopus and Grapploct are octopi, clearly. The first Evo has boxing gloves with which it can clobber you, and Grapploct is a grappler, a word for a variety of fighting styles, from jujitsu to just straight-up wrestling, and some wrestlers wear bright colors and masks. Also, Clobopus's colors make it out to be the curled octopus, which happen to live in the Northeast Atlantic, so around the British Isles. Sinistea and Poltegeist are, well, tea for one. You just can't have a British region without tea. It's literally the most stereotypically British thing there is. So this Pokemon is a little ghost in a teacup, and then a little ghost in a teapot. Poltergeists, to be exact, a type of ghost that takes control of everyday objects and throws them around, usually maliciously. And similarly to your stereotypical British snob, a Sinistea won't go into just any old teapot. It needs to be name brand if it's in a name brand one already. Handcrafted. And yes, I am being serious. There are two types of teapots that you can find and give your Sinistea, and if you happen to have a pompous one, well, then it will only go into the nice one. The one with a label, a logo to show that it's fancy and official. This is a reference to the 18th and 19th centuries when porcelain forgeries were rampant across Europe due to a German scientist learning the, at the time, secret to crafting porcelain. No more was it limited to Asian imports from famous artists. So the ones that were these famous artists suddenly needed authentication markers, stamps of authenticity. And look, the tea ghost even reaches its arm out to hold the teacup while also acting as the handle, and it's got its pinky out. It's a supposedly fancy way of holding teacups, supposedly popularized by British royalty. Milcery and alchemy are milk and cream, as well as sorcery and alchemy, which of course have their ties to European beliefs and folklore. Milk and cream have been super popular in the UK for quite some time. I mean, it's something you add to tea after all. And the way you evolve these Pokemon is a reference to how you turn milk into cream. You just stir it up a bunch while there's something sweet in it. There you go. Indeedee is curious. Its sexual dimorphism makes the females appear as maids and the males as butlers, both stereotypically British things that rich folks would have as servants. Indeed is a common thing that they would say in media. It's fancier than just saying yes. As a name though, Deedee is Welsh and means a few opposing things like pleasure, delight, divine, but also sorrow, broken-hearted, and swarthy. These differences may relate to the different expressions the males versus the females have, as well as just how the job of being a butler or maid may seem. It's full of its delights, but also its sorrows. But as for what animal this is, well, it's definitely an amalgamation of many different parts. It may pull from satyrs and fauns of European myth. I mean, they're standing upright and have horns after all. And come to think of it, this also falls into how they act, as there are these two-horned deities, Faunus and Fauna of Roman myth, a male and a female. Faunus was known for his many services in agriculture and taking care of cattle, and Fauna for her beloved nurturing of living beings. And according to many experts, they are the perfect example of the Roman tendency for gender complementary pairs within a sphere of functionality. Meaning that if you were to make a Pokemon out of them, they would have a big male-female difference in their roles. And we see this for sure, especially when you look at their Pokedex entries. Males will act as valets for those they serve. It's a butler and a guardian. And then the females are particularly good at babysitting. Both of these are gender roles that relate back to those two deities, who, by the way, were also capable of foretelling the future. It's no big deal, but that's why these Pokemon are psychic type. And then they appear to have fur patterns and paws resembling various British mammals from the Mustelidae family, such as polecats, European otters, and minks, all of them being long things. Now, Toxtricity, like Indeedee, is a very unique Pokemon, making it difficult to pinpoint its origins. Its two variant forms are easy. Both are punk rockers, hence the spikes, the mohawks, and the demeanor. One is playing an electric guitar and the other an electric bass, thus the differing number of strings and the whole amped versus low-key naming of the forms, and the chosen form being based on their natures. The more generally extroverted natures become amped and the introverted low-key. But as for the animals they are based on, well, like I said, these are very unique, so it's very likely pulling many elements from all over rather than just being based on one or two things. First of all, they most clearly resemble a sort of lizard or salamander to me, both of which have venomous species, and some salamanders can sense and utilize electricity. And of course, they come in many colors, including purple, yellow, and blue. They may also pull from the concept of keeled scales. Some snakes coil up and rub their scales together, which makes a threatening sound, and to many, that's kind of what punk rock sounds like. Threatening. Its horns and body shape may also pull from the Diplocaulus, a now extinct amphibian, and geckos are able to generate static electricity to help them stick to walls. And well, geckos have the right finger shape for these Pokemon. But ultimately, as you can see, this mon pulls from all over. I like that, it makes it stand out as more unique. And you can really see its gecko traits when it Gigantamaxes. It even has a power pull for a tail now, and a whole electric guitar made of electricity. What? It's baby though. Oh man, I don't want to look at it. Toxel, it's also a bit of a mishmashy baby Pokemon, but it is a baby. It throws tantrums, actually has a diaper, crawls around like a baby, and it's a little punky baby. It's even got the toony angry baby face. It's got 4 horns, kind of like a horned lizard, but ultimately it just seems more anthro than animal. Obstagoon and the Galarian variants of its pre-evolutions are based on heavy metal rockers. They particularly pull elements from the world-famous band Kiss, but if you mix them with a badger, which are black and white and live in the UK and are particularly mean. And also, it's a gnoll, basically a fantasy hyena-human hybrid, first written about by English fantasy author and baron Edward Plunkett, though it wasn't popularized until Dungeons & Dragons came around. But look, this Pokemon even has the pants tassels and the pauldrons, the tongue and the star on the eye. Oh! It's so on the nose. And also, both Obstagoon and Toxtricity are references to the fact that the UK is widely believed to be the birthplace of heavy metal and punk rock. The Hatterene line is one of the most complicated Pokemon in terms of their origins. We are, for sure, going to need to dedicate an entire video to them to go over the many details that we won't go into here. Just know, for now, that these Pokemon are, in a way, personifications of the feminine powers portrayed in many fairy tales, hence this line being all-female, having a princess hat and a witch's hat, and Gigantamaxing into a tall tower with a trapped princess inside. She's the witch and the damsel at the same time, while also having elements from the Mad Hatter, and stores her power in her hair like many witches did. And there's a bit of jellyfish in there too, and perhaps she even has a deep connection with the Impidimp line, as well as being a personification of emotion herself. But we're still looking into all the specifics, so look forward to that video when it comes. But as for the Impidimp line, we actually just recently did a big video all about their details, so click here for that. But again, long story short, we have an imp changeling, a red cap goblin gremlin with witch powers, and a troll with witch powers, and perhaps with a bit of the Green Knight from the King Arthur mythos sprinkled in. But that's all really just scratching the surface. Details in this video here. Stonejorner is, well, it's Stonehenge. Around 2500 BC, these rocks that are in what is now England were put up. We don't know the exact date, and nobody knows why for certain either, but there are many theories, and this Pokemon's Dex entries reflect those theories. Perhaps it has to do with the position of the sun and stars. Perhaps some mystical energy or spiritual belief. Perhaps it's a symbol of everyone coming together. We don't know for sure. It's all very mysterious. Stonejorner, though, has these symbols on its front which aren't actually any real runes, but they they most closely resemble the Odal runic symbol, which, among other things, can mean heritage or lineage, perhaps referencing just how ancient this Pokemon is. Galarian Meowth is a Meowth with a big beard. It's based on the European Wildcat, which is big and fluffy. And when it evolves into Berserker, it gets a steel helmet, steel claws, and it's just straight up a Viking, which notably accidentally invented a rudimentary form of steel, hence the new typing. But also notably, Vikings didn't actually have horns on their battle helmets, but you know, pop culture is a powerful force.
You can't walk around with horns on your helmet. It looks ridiculous.
But what's a Viking doing in Galar? Well, the Norse played a big role in the history of the British Isles. They were constantly raiding the place, and eventually their language mixed with the locals' language, and it eventually formed modern English. We're doing a whole video about this too, don't worry. But as for its name, a Berserker is a rabid class of Viking, essentially. They were crazy, and typically devoid of any sort of empathy. An extreme bloodlust induced through the use of booze and herbal drugs. Quite a terrifying sight, much like some of Berserker's animations, but with the eyes rolling back and all. And often, when a valiant Viking were to fall in battle, a runestone would be placed to commemorate them. Thus, there being many runestones in Great Britain. Hence, Galarian Yamask no longer carrying an Egyptian death mask, but a piece of a runestone instead. Runa Regis then is a ghost trapped within an entire runestone, some of which are known to be cursed, and these runestones often depicted the accomplishments of the fallen, and snakes and serpentine dragons were often depicted on them. Besides the Norse, though, the Romans played the biggest role in Old British history. During the expansion of the Roman Empire, they invaded Great Britain and assimilated it, bringing with them their language and culture, which, after mixing with the locals, the Anglo-Saxons, and the Old Norse, eventually created the English we know today. This brief history lesson is brought to you by Phalinks. This group of Pokemon, when together, look like a stinging caterpillar, which live all over the world and come in a variety of colors. They protect themselves with a thick coat and stingers all over. Similarly, Phalinks protects themselves with shields and Pokeparts. And the Roman part comes in as, rather than one entity, this Pokemon is a group of little black Kirby-looking things holding shields. They are in a Phalanx formation, a military formation that played a major role in the successes of the Greeks, Spartans, and eventually Romans. I mean, just look at him! Another round and spiky Pokemon is Pincurchin, obviously based on the pincushion and a sea urchin. Pincushions were invented in medieval Europe, but the classical tomato design was popularized in the Victorian era. Sea urchins are found all over the world, including the British Isles. They release a toxin that causes paralysis, similar to an electric shock, which is why this Pokemon is electric type. And also, there happens to be a sea urchin named the Pincushion Urchin. And this yellow front butt that the Pokemon has is a reference to sea urchin eggs. When they lay them, they come out in a round clump like this. And in the case of this Pokemon, it makes a little mustache. And another small and spiky Pokemon is Snom. Oh no! It's cute! And it's also literally just a jewel caterpillar. Oh. But at least they made it snow and ice instead of bug and gross. Jewel caterpillars come in a variety of colors and live all over, and the same can be said of their moth forms, like this Venezuelan poodle moth. It's white, like frost moth, though not technically from a jewel caterpillar. But considering that the Galar region, like England, is particularly known for its industrialization and pollution, and that frost moth's Pokedex entry states that it shows no mercy to any who desecrate fields and mountains, we could say that frost moth has some peppered moth problems. Darker colored moths can wind up turning partially or completely white in response to lots of pollution in the air, and were discovered and researched in the 1800s in Manchester, England, which was quite industrialized. And speaking of pollution, Galarian Corsola and Cursula also have their own video here, but basically they are bleached coral, basically the dead remains of coral when the algae leaves. But why does it leave? Well, in short, it's climate change. But another question is why Cursula look the way that they do. And here you go. On top of regular coral reefs getting bleached, deep sea cold water reefs, like those found around the British Isles, have had their reefs damaged by dirty fishing practices, particularly the use of roller nets, which are dragged along the lower ocean, breaking off the top parts of various corals, leaving behind these dead bottoms, much like Cursula. Now, the ghostly ectoplasm that grows from this dead bottom similarly drags it across the ground. It can also be mentioned that white zigzag coral and Lophelia corals are found in the Northeast Atlantic, and that they grow in similar patterns to Cursula. They are even described as having thick skeletal parts and produce a large amount of thick mucus that acts in a protective capacity to shield the coral skeleton from attacks. Similarly, Cursula's Pokédex entry states that it uses the ghostly ectoplasm to protect its core. Galarian Wheezing clearly is your stereotypical depiction of a rich businessman/factory owner during the Industrial Revolution, which, again, England started. This just happens to be when these chops and mustaches, as well as top hats, were in fashion. They were used as a means of showing off your status. So, just stretch the top of your top hats out longer and longer to make a smokestack, and there you go. But interestingly, these Wheezing are fairy type, and they actually clean the air around them. Clearly that's a touch of fairy magic, but you could also look to nuclear plants' cooling towers. As it's not pollution coming out of them, it's completely clean steam. Nuclear energy, all things considered, is one of the cleanest and safest renewable energy sources overall. And that's even after you factor in the nuclear waste that it does create. While wind, water, and solar is technically safer and cleaner, it is not nearly powerful enough or reliable enough to meet our energy needs. And I do think it's fine to look to nuclear towers as an inspiration here, as the United Kingdom established the world's first civil nuclear program, and now over a quarter of its energy is produced by it. Galarian Ponyta and Rapidash are pretty simple. They are your classical unicorn with magical, girly My Little Pony colors and proportions! But it's deeper than that, of course. Unicorns played a large role in the history and folklore of places all across Eurasia, but especially Western Europe. In fact, to this day, the unicorn is the national animal of Scotland, and Scotland's medieval royal coat of arms featured 2 unicorns as well. And it was also believed that crushed up unicorn horns could cure many ailments, including poisonings, explaining their ability to cure and prevent poison. Galarian Farfetch'd is even more of a duck samurai with a leek than before. Notably though, leeks in Great Britain are significantly larger than they are in most places. Hence, why this Farfetch'd has to carry it around like this, which is similar to how many samurai would carry their large odachi, swords so big that sometimes you would need someone else's help to carry it while traveling. But the largest sword ever actually used in combat was the Claymore, a heavy Scottish sword that was more than 7 feet long. They too were mostly lifted over the shoulders, and then the warrior would work together with gravity to bring the sword down. Surfetch'd then uses a leek sword and/or leek lance to charge forward with. And it's also got a leek shield. Lances and shields were used like this in jousting, a popular medieval European sport. Surfetch'd, also having this expression and its now white feathers, seems to fall in line with your stereotypical depiction of an egotistical, chivalrous knight with his beautiful white steed. Except it's a domesticated duck, common across all of Eurasia. But it's not just any egotistical, chivalrous white knight. No, it's the chivalrous, egotistical white knight, the one that started the trope, Lancelot of the King Arthur mythos. Full of himself, white horse, white knight, uses a lance, full name is Lancelot du Lac, which means Lancelot of the Lake, lakes being where ducks live. Yeah, and also there's a leek named the Lancelot Leek. I'm sure that helps too. Galarian Mr. Mime is no longer a mime, but a tap dancer, using hardened ice on the bottom of its feet to make the sounds. As you've probably gathered, tap dancing originated in the United States. Wait, that's not the UK? Why does it do it then? Oh, alrighty then. Well, tap dancing originated in the United States in the 19th century. African-American slaves had their traditional percussion instruments taken away, so many turned to percussion dance instead. And it wasn't just them. Other oppressed minorities like the Irish were in on it too. Hence, tap dancing being a combination of African percussion and Irish clog dancing, which was also somewhat popular in Wales and Scotland. Eventually, this led to the tap dancing we know today, and it got popular. And of course, led to many famous performers such as Charlie Chaplin, world-famous English comic, to get in on the action, and he is clearly the inspiration behind Mr. Rhyme. Galarian Darumaka and Darmanitan keep their Daruma doll and orangutan inspirations somewhat, but add on snowman inspirations. While snowmen aren't particularly British, the abominable snowman sort of is. While Yetis are Tibetan, the term abominable snowman was coined by Charles Howard Bury while he led the 1921 British Mount Everest reconnaissance expedition, which also marked the beginning of the Western world's love of Yetis. Galarian Stunfisk is still a flounder, but now is mixed with a bear trap, obviously, which, fun fact, were never actually intended for bears. They were originally called man traps, or foothold traps, used to deter poachers and burglars. But eventually, a man named Frank Conybeare, a Canadian, reinvented them to use in animal trapping for furs. So the term bear trap eventually caught on, named after the inventor rather than the primary animal it's trying to get. And I mean, Canada has a strong relationship with the UK. They even still have the Queen on their money. So there you go. But anyway, while some of these bear traps do have teeth, most don't. It's media that has exaggerated the size of the teeth to make them scarier looking and more damaging for the sake of plot. Another steel type, Duraludon, is, well, let's just look at its Gigantamax form. It's a skyscraper, a building, specifically the Shard, a landmark building in London. It's even got the spikes at the top. As for its body and namesake, it's made out of duralumin, a lightweight alloy that was invented in Germany around 1903 and was used to make most European aircraft after World War I. But it's kind of prone to rusting, which is why Duraludon likes living in caves to avoid the rain. As for why it's dragon, well, dragons do have a lot to do with European myth. And metal dragons are a thing, though they are uncommon. And as for its body shape, other than the building, at this point I'm still convinced it's a lighter. Its mouth opens up like one, the button thing on the back of its head is the same, it launches heated breath attacks from there. I mean, come on! The lighter was invented by a German though, and Bic lighters are French, and smoking didn't catch on in the UK until the 1600s, but maybe it's a pun. It's a lighter because duralumin is a very lightweight material. It's lighter than most other metals. Well, there is a vague inspiration from Mechagodzilla, as the Pokédex mentions its rivalry with Tyranitar, who was inspired by Godzilla, so there's that. Another steel type is Kufant and Copperaja. Indian elephants, clearly, made of copper, a metal which is this classical orangish bronze color until it ages and oxidizes, at which point it becomes this green color. But how do we know it's an Asian or Indian elephant and not an African or pygmy elephant? Well, the name gives it away for one. A Maharaja is an Indian king or prince, and Southeast Asia has a load of copper ore deposits. But also, the UK has quite the history with India, though less formative history and more British Empire imperialism take over the world history. The British Empire had total control of India for nearly a century, which did contribute to the large number of Indian immigrants into Great Britain. And look, Copperaja even has the Indian style of eyeliner. Indian elephants were tamed long ago and are used for their strength for help with ancient construction, which is why these Pokemon have excavator trunks. Also, India would use them for war purposes as well, covering them in armor and putting entire towers on their backs, which made them look pretty dang tall and square, which may be why Copperaja is angled like this too, especially its Gigantamaxed form. Now, all four fossil Pokemon are a reference to early paleontology. We just made a big video going into all of the details, so click here for that. But to keep it simple for this video, some of the founders of the field got a lot of stuff messed up and had a big bone war about it. They started putting different parts of different dinosaurs together and claimed they were new species. One time a skull was put at the end of a tail instead of the neck, and another time they just mixed up the young and the old dinosaurs of the same species and called them different species. It's a big mess. Again, whole video about their details here. But right now our best guesses for the types of dinosaurs they are a Dunkleosteus for Vish, something from the Draconis genus like a Pachycephalosauridae or other Maniraptor for Draco, though some have pointed out the Stegosaurus elements here, but I am leaning more towards the first, a prehistoric Ice Age walrus for Arcto, and a generic sort of speedy raptor for Zolt. Another extinct mon that we're doing a whole video for is the Dragapult line, so for way more details, check that out. But first off, there's the extinct Diplocalus. They are all dead, so ghost type. But that isn't all, as there is clearly some jet and stealth bomber inspiration here too. Stealth bombers look this way so that they don't appear on radar. It's as if they were invisible, thus ghost type as well. And this Pokemon also holds itself similarly to Crocodilia in the water, easily hidden ambush predators who sometimes hold their babies on their heads. And then, of course, the catapult in its name isn't referring to medieval catapults, but rather the catapults that launch jets from aircraft carriers. And notably, the first aircraft carrier was invented by our old friends in the Royal Navy back in 1806. But as for the aircraft carrier we know of today, it was a joint effort between the US and UK, though the US did do most of it. But the first man to take off and land on it was British. And again, more details in our other video. Really, if you haven't subscribed yet, why not? You made it this far in the video, you clearly love this stuff. Subscribe, you won't regret it. I hope. Now then, the legendaries. As confirmed in an interview, Zacian and Zamazenta got their names from the idea of how myths and legends are formed. People never saw these Pokemon clearly, they just see a whoosh of color. So they became known as the Cyan and the Magenta, referring to their colors. Then as for their lore itself, they do seem to pull from the King Arthur mythos somewhat. There's the whole sword in the stone thing, but they've expanded it to also include a shield. And even the statue in the hotel may be a depiction of this world's version of King Arthur. And by the way, similarly to how in Pokemon there's confusion as to whether the hero was one or many people, there is some debate as to whether or not King Arthur is just King Arthur, or rather, it's an amalgamation of mini stories events from multiple myths and legends all thrown onto one character. But now, why two wolves? Well, we're still digging deeper into it, so that'll be its own video, but for now, know this. Generation 6 and 7 also has Norse inspirations. Gen 6, which was based in France, so also Europe, especially. I mean, look at its whole legendary trio. They, along with a bit of Sun and Moon, all have ties to Ragnarok, a rebirth of the world, an Armageddon that begins life anew. And within this Norse tale, there are two wolves, Skull and Hati, who chase down the sun and the moon, and when Ragnarok comes, they will catch and devour them. And now you may notice that Zacian's sword becomes activated with the shape and glow of the moon, and Zamazenta's shield is fiery and glows with the warmth of the sun. There's likely a lot more to these Pokemon, but of course, we're still digging. And lastly, Eternatus. It looks very much like an Ultra Beast, or like the ultimate antagonists from the Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, as in, they appear more like concepts rather than specific entities. Looking at its name, we clearly get eternity and natus, which is Latin for born. Eternatus then is born again, or immortalized. We might even have a little bit of tornado in here, as its Gigantamax form is, well, gigantic, but also twirls around, blowing winds and everything around it everywhere. And also, this Pokemon having everything to do with Dynamax energy may also explain the 3 twirling clouds that are a part of the phenomenon. It's a little mini swirl of wind, a tornado. Also in the name is Thanatos, also known as Thanatos, the Greek personification of death. Essentially, the ancient Grim Reaper. Its poison typing reflects this connection with death, and the dragon simply comes from the fact that it appears to be a space dragon skeleton. It likely has many connections with Necrozma as well. Dragons are often used in Armageddon myths from all sorts of cultures. After all, they are an ultimate being, capable of bringing the void of death with their very presence. And this is reflected in its Gigantamax form, as the Pokédex states that its very presence causes even space-time to distort around it. But for now, beyond an alien personification of death, we don't know much. But as the trading card game and anime progress, I'm sure we'll be able to uncover more. And obviously, that too will have its own video. So then, now, without adding too much more time to this video, do you have any details to add? Anything that we missed? I'm sure that with this video, I've only really dipped my toes into it, which is why we also do entire videos about individual lines of Pokemon, so be sure to check all those out. And thanks so much, just big thanks for watching. Please consider supporting us on Patreon or check out our merch store. We have this new shirt design. It's awesome. And until next time, you never stop using your noggin.